Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to start answering questions that we got at our email address, asknorthwoods@gmail.com. Before we go any further, if you've not subscribed already, please hit that subscribe button. You can follow along, be part of the conversation, have your questions answered here. So we'll get into these three questions we've got. The first one came from a gentleman named Brad. He was asking about spring planting clover and if we recommend a nurse crop of oats. Yes, we do. I've been planting clover since 2004, and every time we spring plant clover, we'll use 50 pounds an acre of oats as a nurse crop. Now that's kind of a weed suppressor. What we do with this process is we'll do a couple of sprayings. If we need to, work the ground up a little bit, spread our oats, again 50 pounds an acre, you don't want to get carried away. And then we're going to put the fertilizers, usually what I'll like, obviously we'll do a soil test, but usually ends up being triple 19 because we do need a little bit of nitrogen to help these oats grow, and then the P and the K is good for the clover. So we'll do 8 to 10 pounds of clover an acre, and that's just rolled in after we get the oats and the the oats and the fertilizer covered. Now another question came in, would you use brassicas as a nurse crop? And there's quite a few reasons I would not recommend brassicas as a nurse crop. Here's why. Number one being brassicas take a high amount of nutrients out of the soil. I mean, you look at the fertilization recommendations for brassicas in the fall, and it's a lot. These clovers, especially in the spring when they're growing, we need as much nutrients to them as possible. I do not want the brassicas and the clovers both fighting for the same nutrients. Number two, if you plant brassicas in the spring, if they are left alone by the deer and they canopy, not only are we now robbing this clover from nutrients, but now we're robbing it from sunlight. So we're kind of putting this clover behind the 8-ball. Number three, if you remember in a couple of videos past we did on frost seeding brassicas, some brassicas have what's called an allelopathic effect, which is they give off chemicals as they're growing, which may again inhibit or prevent some of this clover from growing. Okay, that's just facts, folks. I'm not making this up. So to me, brassicas spring planting as a nurse crop for oats, you're really putting this clover, there's a chance you're putting this clover behind the 8-ball. You may not get the growth you want. So we strictly recommend oats as a spring planting nurse crop, and if you're going to do clover in the fall, we'll go oats and cereal rye. A gentleman named Neil asked about cover crops in corn rows. He was talking about clover as a weed suppression as well as giving off nitrogen for the growing corn crop. And a couple of thoughts. I do really like that, especially if you're hunting or you're growing corn for deer. I still think you need to have something in, because if you think about a corn, how much space it takes to grow corn, and what you get on that return from that space, there's a lot of empty space. So I really like seeding something in between the corn rows. Now what I tell our customers, one is, if possible, at all possible, run your corn rows north and south. And because as the sun, we get past June, the sun gets lower and lower and lower in that southern sky. If you're running your corn rows north and south, you're going to still hit sun. Two, we like to see 30 to 40 inch corn rows, and people are like, oh my God, that's so wide. Well, if you're trying, if you know you're going to interseed in between those corn rows, you have to get some sunlight in there, especially if you got to run those corn rows east and west. Now we've seen some studies where the 30 to 40 inch corn rows with the cover crop in between there, the yield wasn't that bad. It wasn't as bad as you thought. If you might be cutting the seeding rate in half, but your yield didn't suffer as bad. They had bigger stalks, bigger cobs. So. But again, you're adding more food. You're not just relying on the corn, you're adding more food. You got to give that food some space. Now the timing of the seeding is going to depend on what type of corn you're planting. As far as if you did Roundup Ready corn, you do your last spraying, obviously a little, right after spraying, you're ready to drop your cover crop. In this case, he was asking about clovers. But now if you went with conventional corn and you're using atrazine, or I believe there's a chemical called dual 2-magnum, I can't think of the actual chemical scientific name of it, but some of those have a residual effect for a long, long time to where you might not be able to plant anything all year. So you're going to have to be, he wasn't really specific on how he was taking care of weeds. I guess the third option would be mechanical weed control with I can't think of the name of it, but it's like a spring fruit tooth drag that goes in between the corn rows. But now that might be limited when you can do that, because once the corn gets so tall, you might not be able to go in there. So you could still do that and get away with planting. I would recommend between crimson and red, I'd probably do red. I don't think I'd do whites because white's pretty expensive. And then everything we've looked at, our research shows that of all the clovers, red seems to provide the most amount of nitrogen for any species that's going to follow up that red clover. So we would probably do red clover, but again, depending on what kind of weed control he's doing, you may or may not even get to plant. So, gentleman, JP asked about our soil builder. Actually asked 3 questions. In our description, we talk about thin soil. What is thin soil? Thin soil to me is sandy soil, soil that's very low in organic matter, maybe less than 1.5%. You know, anything to me under 2% is getting kind of thin. But 1.5, maybe even I've seen 0.5%. That's what we mean by thin soil. Thin soil is very in need of something like our soil builder. A lot of carbon is going to be in the soil, and then the root system that soil builder provides is tremendous. When is it planted? Is it planted the same time as the buckwheat is? No, not really. Albeit there's a buckwheat component in our soil builder. It's very heavy on cereal grains. It's got 2 varieties of sorghum, which are phenomenal creators of organic matter. Sunflowers, which is another good creator of organic matter. It's got some legumes in there for nitrogen production. So what we're looking at is after the last chance of frost with our soil builder, soil temperature probably low to mid 50s. That's when we're looking at planting it. We will have a complete product video on the soil builder coming up soon because it's going to be a spring planting project, and we just want folks to be aware of what the benefits are. Do the deer eat it similar to buckwheat? The soil builder was born out of necessity due to we had a lot of customers in northern lower Michigan, and the problem they were having with this buckwheat was that the deer were eating it to the ground. They're big wood area, a lot of forest, poor soil, and this buckwheat would turn into, you know, mid-July or late June. All of a sudden you got this carpet of green there, and they mow it to the ground, and they can't do that buckwheat roll down method. So that's where we came up with the soil builder. There is a buckwheat component in it, but we have a lot of other things in there that the deer really don't eat. So they do nip at it, but I've seen a lot of success in areas where there's heavy deer browsing that they leave this alone once it gets rolling. So I hope that answers everyone's questions. I can't thank you enough for sending these questions in. Thanks for taking part in this, and we'll probably do another one of these later on in the week. So see you all in a few days. Thank you.